Yeah, good morning. Welcome to the May 21st Retail Committee. First is call to order. Want to take roll?
Councilmember Burt.
Here.
Chair Rectal.
Here.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Here.
For the record, all are present.
Okay. Next is public comment on anything that's not on the agenda, but still is under the purview of this committee. Anyone online?
No, there are no requests to speak.
Okay. Then we'll move on to, we have one item. It's CalAv, a car-free California Avenue October activation program. And I want to make one quick announcement here. We have, tonight there is a public outreach meeting, 6 p.m. at Lucy Stern. This is a car-free street project community workshop from 6 to 7:30 at Lucy Stern. Okay, we'll kick it over to Bruce for the presentation. Yeah.
All right, great. Good morning, council members. Really appreciate the time we have here, and I appreciate that we've created a special meeting to be able to talk about Cal Avenue and outdoor activation. So I'm Bruce Fukuji with the city manager's office. So why don't we, do I advance the slides here? Yeah, okay. Okay, great, thanks. All right, so I want to kind of walk you through what the outdoor activation program work is. As part of the scope of work at what to do for transformation of Cal Avenue, you know, this is part of that program of things, the near-term improvements, looking at signage, looking at outdoor dining. This is what we're calling outdoor activation, and then street design. Those are sort of like the main components. So this is the sort of really the third of four parts of this program. And so what I want to today kind of walk through is just the vision of what outdoor activation is, what we're trying to create here, how this is different from the parklet program, because part of the request from council was to take a look at how to modify the existing parklet program to be able to adapt it to Cal Avenue. So I want to talk about what's different with Cal Avenue and the parklet program. We've done a lot of outreach to merchants. I want to talk about kind of the high level preferences that they have communicated to staff about what they'd like to see regarding outdoor dining and outdoor activation, go a little bit over permit requirements and design guidance, and then some other programming considerations a little bit on the schedule. So next. Great, thanks. So, you know, the vision that's really emerged, and I think it really reflects the council's action that was taken to amend the comp plan to designate California Avenue as a community street. So it's a car-free, you know, or no vehicle traffic, restricted vehicle movement street. And I think that what's special about it is a car-free experience, obviously, what to do to help support the economic vibrancy of the street itself. But I think the key thing about it being car-free is how to keep it flexible and open. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that because you have the farmers market that happens every Sunday. So the street has to function like a street in terms of being able to accommodate all those actions that happen on the roadway with putting tents in and having service vehicles coming in and out. But then when the market's not there, you have the opportunity for it to function really as a car-free, bicycle-friendly environment. And one of the big benefits of that, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is just how to have that be what's needed for it to be safe, but also what to do about being inclusive, clean and well maintained. So this picture, what I like about this picture, this is in the UK, is that it shows kind of outdoor dining without the protections that you normally see with parklets, like you see on University Avenue and other streets, where you have to really defend the space from the threat of vehicles. So you don't have to have enclosures, you don't have to have barriers, you don't have to have traffic elements, you don't have to have curb things to protect people from cars and stuff like that. You can actually have a much more open environment. And that allows for greater social engagement. People can see what's going on, they can walk by, they can hear conversations. There's a lot more you can do because it's a much quieter, really more peaceful kind of street environment that's going to be vibrant based on the amount of life and vitality of people who are on the street. So on the next slide. So, what's the difference between parklets and what's on Cal Avenue? As I mentioned earlier, obviously the street layout and access is completely different. And you don't have to use the road, the roadways, not just for cars anymore. But I think that what's different also about the no car issue is that the intentions for the parklets, the intention for car-free Cal Avenue and the outdoor activation is slightly different because we're looking at how to balance the space and how it's being used for both commercial and community use and the use of the right-of-way. And parklets are really designed primarily for outdoor dining and to protect people from vehicle traffic. And this is looking at something different. It's looking at how does the outdoor dining contribute to the street life. So it's actually a very different set of intentions around how they should be thought about. And I think it really is a guiding idea. So we're trying to prioritize an environment that's open and transparent and accessible for people who are walking or riding their bike. And then, as I mentioned before, it's got to be flexible for use throughout the day. So those are things that are different that parklets don't have to do. Next slide. So we met with the merchants. We've been meeting with them monthly. We went through and provided a whole workshop that was on just their preferences for outdoor dining, all the design elements and features that they have, what they like, they didn't like, what works, what doesn't work. We came up with this program. We've presented it and discussed it with them, and we've gone through all the guidance and the requirements. And we've not only presented that and discussed it twice in two different merchant meetings, but we've also had individual meetings with merchants at their place of business to specifically talk about what their concerns or issues are with this program. So we've done a lot of outreach, but I would say like the main themes that have come out of that is let's be fair about outdoor dining for everyone. Let's think about what they would like, which is about how to make a longer term investment in aesthetic improvements that they can do something that really reflects their business and is attractive to their customers and clientele to have them want to spend time and dine. Look at what needs to be needed for weather protection, heating the space, wind, and things like that. Flexibility to choose design materials, anything that helps them be individual. And so that's about seating, merchandising, lighting, flowers, plants, all kinds of things that are important for that they can uniquely do for their business. And then there was a concern to not have anything that reflects next door to them that reflects badly on their business. So let's everybody do a good job and look great. I mean, that's kind of where it was. And they were very clear on the list of things they did not want to see. And the way that we've structured the guidance is that all the things they didn't want to see, we've made sure are prohibited to happen. So I think we've been very responsive to their concerns. Next slide. So, this activation program, I think that, it was very important. We got the message from council around what's needed so that people can have an action by council early. This is anticipated for a June 9th council meeting to take action on this based on the feedback we get here. That's kind of what we're lining up. The goal is so that businesses understand over the summer what is permitted and what's needed in order to move forward so that they can do whatever investment they want to, so they're prepared for the winter, this coming winter. So we really did everything we can to help expedite getting this out. Now, I think what's really important is that what's the real purpose here of this? And it's really to enable restaurants to occupy the public right-of-way for outdoor seating to support their businesses and community vitality, and to do it through a pretty streamlined encroachment permit process that doesn't have to go through architectural design review or other things. It doesn't impose undue time and cost burdens on the applicants. And at the same time, it's done in such a way as to not impact the functions and safety of the street. And it meets the sort of objectives we've been talking about how to have it be an open environment. So that's really what the purpose of this is. Okay, so next. Yeah, so, as I had talked about this previously, but, in order to make CalAv work, because it's not based on parking spaces, we had to think about how do you reallocate the space in the street. So we looked at the street cross section. It's 90 feet wide. It's actually quite wide, and remarkably, it's actually the same width of some of the more successful pedestrian malls that have happened, like Pearl Street's 90 feet in Boulder, or in 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica is actually 90 feet. So it's actually, ironically enough, it's the right width, I think, for some of the ones that have been successful that haven't been, And so we looked at how to reorganize it in terms of sort of frontage, pedestrian, street furniture activity, and access zones. And we did that. And then the next slide is that the other thing we had to do is we had to look at the street, not in terms of parking spaces, like we're going to do 2 parking spaces or 4 parking spaces. We had to think about it completely differently. We had to look at it based on buildings and what their emergency egress needs are. So there's 30 buildings on Cal Avenue from El Camino to Birch Street. And, I walked with staff, Public Works, with, fire staff. We walked the entire street and went through and looked at how do we organize where these zones should be? I mean, part of it was wanting to have the outdoor dining to be in front of their establishment primarily, all right? And then to create setbacks in order to make sure that there's what's needed for emergency egress for people who might be exiting the building in case of a fire, or for emergency egress to be able to access the building in order to provide fire and life safety. So that sets sort of the site setbacks. So you have kind of the street zones along the length of the street as you go down, and then from front of each property, you have kind of these setbacks and these zones. And then a whole series of things about not obstructions to avoid. And then can we see the next slide? So then we mapped the whole street, and this is sort of El Camino to Mimosa Lane, and then the next slide is really from Mimosa Lane to Birch. But basically, this is establishing sort of the area where it's permitted to do these outdoor activation areas. So it can be on the sidewalk, where there's extended sidewalks. It can be on the roadway, where it's either a parallel or diagonal parking space, however it might be configured. And then we've gone through and we've identified everything that's needed to maintain emergency egress for all of these different sites. So we've mapped this out. Next slide. And we've looked at all the different conditions related to how that is and came up with basically what is a very fair and reasonable way to think about outdoor activation on a building by building basis. Sort of next. Yeah. So, that said, I think the other thing that's important is that we were very, I would say, kind of thoughtfully minimalist, let me put it that way, around what's required versus what's optional. Now, we looked at all the design elements that are needed to help really create an outdoor dining area or outdoor activation area, whether it's for merchandising or dining. I'm going to focus on dining. So I've covered sort of location setbacks. We have a lot of discussion in here about use and what you can or can't do, and accessibility. And there's work on what the operator responsibilities are in the permitting process. But I think that the design elements really kind of are in 2 categories, like what's required and what's optional. And for anything that's done, if it's a required element, which are like planters, lighting, electrical, and like waste and ADA, those are sort of like really all required. No matter what you do, you have to meet those things. And then more optional things that are up to the business as to whether they want to do that. And that would be, platforms, heating, branding, signage, overhead shelters, sidewalls, railings, all those things are optional. But regardless of what elements you use, we're very clear about what you can or can't do, what the requirements are for all these things. And so, we can go to the next slide. I think that with just, I'll go through these briefly, and then we'll be available to answer all kinds of questions that'll be about this. I think on the question of platforms, they're not required. Part of Cal Avenue, between, Ash and Birch Street, the street's already level. The sidewalk and the roadway are already at the same level. So there's no reason to put a platform. That doesn't make any sense. In other cases, you have between, Mimosa Lane and El Camino, you have some places where there's formally diagonal parking and parallel parking. And, if it's up to the business, if they want to do a platform, they could do a platform to extend the sidewalk so it's flush. But they're going to have to sort out how they want to do that. And then this has all the requirements for how to do that. But I think what's really important, it's different than like Ramona Street or other parklets. We're saying they're not to be fastened to the ground, okay? Because we went through a whole process with utilities around this. And if there's a gas leak or if there's a water main problem or other thing like that, there could be a need for very short notice access to the below grade utilities. And so these things have to be able to be removed if you want to do it. I think that's platforms. I don't see a lot of platforms going in, but if that's something someone wants to do, they can do that. But we are requiring planters, and the way we're thinking about the planters is, when you're walking down the street in your direction of travel, to have the planters really kind of perpendicular to that, so they actually help divide spaces up as you're going down the street. So you're walking down the sidewalk. There's people who are sitting there eating, and you have some planters there so that you're not like directly, walking right into them. I think that's really important. And they're also saying there has to be like a minimum of about 25% that's on the side that's facing the access way. So when you're walking down the center of the street or riding your bike, there's a certain amount of planting that's required just facing that. But it's saying you don't have to do the picket fences and the railings and all these other things that are sort of out there that are really kind of defending some of those spaces that we're saying, really, that's not needed. Let's just open those things up. So that's planters. With the overhead shelter, what we're looking at here are really kind of large format cantilevered umbrellas and awnings. These things have really evolved in terms of what they are, and they've come with heating and lighting already integrated into them. And they can be quite large in their size, so they're not like an 8x8 thing. They could be 18 or 20 feet, so or 12 by 12 or 12 by 16 or 12 by 18. So they can be pretty large. And I think that what's great about that is that it can reflect the business character in terms of its color and vitality on the street. So you can kind of see and they can be differentiated around that. And then they can adjust based on what's going on seasonally in terms of the sunlight and things like that. So I think that that's a good approach for how to do that. And then we have some things on signage, and it's in the staff report, but I really think it's important that there's sandwich board signs permitted on the street. It's not permitted now, but I think for people walking down the center of the street, having that to help people know what's along the sidewalks, I think would be very, very, very helpful. The next slide. Yeah, and then, we're requiring, lighting and electrical work. We can talk about that more, but the electrical work has to be brought up to code. And that's just a safety issue and a reasonable standard for what's needed. And if you're going to be eating outdoors in the evening, there needs to be lighting. And I think that's something we're looking at. Like heaters, we're saying can be more optional, and they could be propane, gas, or they could be electric heaters. We're saying both, as you currently permit those things. On waste, we're just saying how to kind of have it be a little bit tidier around it. What we found is that because there's the expansion of outdoor dining, on the average, it's like 180% more seating than what's inside the building, and in some cases, it's like 100 to 300 or 400%. I mean, it's quite a bit larger in some cases. That there's been this bringing outdoors some of the things needed to kind of prep food or to take care of doing things. And we just want to make sure all of that's kind of managed properly and looks good. So we covered that. And then the last thing's about accessibility. And, that's a ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, we're required to make sure you meet all those requirements. So those are kind of the main things about the design elements, just to kind of touch on that. And the next, and I think that just to kind of wrap up, we went through the April update to the Parklet program that was for Ramona Street, and we've incorporated all the lessons learned, in there in this document. But I think that what's important is, it's an annual renewal process. There'll be, permit fees, right? Application fees, renewal fees, license fees on that. And if tenant leaves, you're responsible for removing it and cleaning up. We've been seeing in other cities that parklets and things that get left after the tenants left, so they got to clean all that up. But I think the main thing is what's needed for utility and maintenance, and let short notice if something has to happen. And that's one of the things we're looking at. I want to keep things flexible because the street just has so many utilities underneath it that, it just, you need to have the right expectations set around that. So
The utilities are not down the center, they're spread
they're
out.
all over the place. I mean, you should think of a street as like a utility corridor. It like has everything in it. I mean, that has a water main that doesn't even that connects the western part and eastern parts of the city. I mean, it's just like a giant water main that's going through there. You have the main for the street, you have the stormwater, you have the sewer lines, you have laterals from every single business that goes out there, and you have all the roof drainage that goes through the sidewalk. So there's like a lot going on in the street. And it's just hard to find space to not not interrupt that. So, that's really, I just wanted to mention that. And then the next slide. So, but some issues that have come up, and we can happy to discuss this, is that should there be structures permitted in the right of way? Happy to discuss that issue if we want to get into that. The thing about sandwich boards, I think it's important to know that there are some, impacts to the sanitary sewer system. I mean, part of this program, and I know it's been temporary for a long time, and you've had a lot of occupancy of the outdoor areas for dining already, and I kind of went through it in the staff report already. But we're adding basically like 800 or so or more seats than were permitted when those businesses were permitted to use to be there. Some businesses have. I mean, the issue is, and they generate a lot of grease, right? Fats, oils, and they have a grease control devices that are part of there, and that's supposed to manage and prevent the flow into the sewer system, but they have to be maintained and cleaned on a regular basis. And increasing the demand has required much higher rates of maintenance on more inspections to make sure they're, functioning well. And there's several businesses that have got great state-of-the-art facilities, and you have others that have what we're calling like legacy facilities that are really outdated, and they are higher risk to having these things leak into your system. So anyway, I just want to point that out, that's a programmatic thing that needs to be really, really looked at.
And when you're talking about maintenance, is that by the city or by the restaurants or both?
Well, both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. Yeah. I mean, the restaurants are responsible for maintaining that, but city inspectors come in and look at what's going on with those things. And it requires a lot more inspections on a more regular basis to mitigate the risk of that. So I wanted to point that out. I'm not an expert in this topic, so, I'm only be able to tell you what I know. The other thing is about restrooms. And we've talked with our chief building official about this a lot, and that's it with all expanded dining, there's not enough restroom capacity. And so there needs to be something done about that. And we've been talking about maybe something public restrooms. The benefit of doing something like that is like, it's very high cost for businesses to have to install a restroom. And for many of these businesses, they're very constrained in their space already. Okay. And so it's probably more efficient if it's more food court-like, where you have a few restrooms that can serve a lot of restaurants. That's probably a more efficient way to go about doing that. So anyway, I just want to point that out, that's a need that has to be addressed, and has been brought up both by community members and the restaurant folks. I just wanted to say that. So we could talk about any of those things more in the next slide. Yeah, it's just that, what we're looking at is a game plan moving forward. I'm sorry this has gone more than 10 minutes, but we met with the merchants in April. We're having our retail community meeting. We're having a community meeting tonight. Tonight's meeting is really just on public life, how to activate the street, like community activities that can be in the public spaces on the street, and getting feedback on that. That's what that is. We have a tentative merchant meeting. We've been doing them at like the last Tuesday of every month. At that meeting, we want to go over what we're learning and what we're doing in the workshop tonight, so they can kind of see what that's all about. And then our goal is really to be on the June 9th council agenda with this item, so that this can get passed by resolution. And I'm sure Tim will probably be able to talk more about that if we need to. That's our game plan. So that's it for what I want to present. So thank you for your patience with that.
Thank you. We'll do a round of questions before we go to public comment. Julie, do you have anything?
I probably have comments more than questions, so I'll pass. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I let the chair know in advance the meeting that I have to leave at 10 for a half hour for an overseas conference. But then I'll be able to return. And just a couple of high-level questions that the staff report, I can't remember whether they referred to that we're allowing parklets or not, but there's been a decision that we wouldn't allow parklets akin to what we have in the downtown area and Ramona on Cal Ave. And my understanding is that was really over a concern over both aesthetics and kind of visibility. Are those the two primary reasons?
Yeah, I think, are you referring to like in the parklet program, it permits not only the enclosure wall, but a roof?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what we're saying here on Cal Avenue is we're not requiring the enclosure and we're
Not requiring or allowing?
well, let me talk about, we're not, well, you can do planters, you could do screen walls, you can do railings. Those are all enclosures for the dining area. But we're not permitting roofs.
Okay, but even on the enclosure, is it the same? Are we allowing the same as we are in the downtown?
No.
Okay, so that's clarification I wanted.
Yeah.
And so not, we're not allowing either the sidewall enclosures or the roofs that are similar to the parklets that we have downtown. And what I was getting at is to get a clear explanation of why is that recommendation that way?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. You know, we've talked about the traffic reasons. There's no need for protecting parklets from cars. We're all clear about that. But I think that what people don't fully realize is that like a parklet, you know, is 72 square feet for one parking space. It's very small. And if you have two parking spaces, it's like 192 square feet. It's very small. Okay. And that's even if it's diagonal parking. Diagonal parking is like 160, 170 square feet. Even if you did 4 diagonal parking spaces, like you just maxed out diagonal parking, it's like 400 square feet. On Cal Avenue now today, the average amount of space that businesses are occupying, the average is about 660 square feet. It's much, much larger. We're some restaurants up to over 1,000. So, you know, we're looking at kind of containing that a little bit by having the focus mostly on front of their businesses, you know, but there's some exceptions. So even with doing that, it's about 550 square feet. So these are pretty large areas. Okay. They're much larger areas than, and so if you build a structure with a roof, you know, over that, okay, then you're really, to do that amount of area, not only does that have to be sprinkled, it really becomes a building. The building code really needs to apply to do something like that. And so, and some of the things that have been shown to us, staff, that architects have been sort of exploring for projects on Cal Avenue, you know, one of them was like 900 square feet. Okay, that's really, really large. It would require over like the foundation system for that was pretty extensive. You'd had over like 12 or 14 columns, would all have to have foundations for all those things. It all has to be seismic. It then has to be sprinklered, so it has to have a water system that connects to it. And so what happens is that, you know, a business is going to want to maximize that space.
Well, let me pause there. So as I'm understanding that, you're framing the issue is if we allowed parklets as large as the current outdoor spaces on Cal Ave, it would present all those issues. If we allowed parklets the size of what we allow in downtown, it would not.
It's not really about, well, the size makes it a lot worse. Okay. But even if you did parklet structures, I mean, you have parallel spaces and you have diagonal spaces on Cal Avenue. So whatever we want to permit, if you were to try to go that way, it would have to apply to both. So even it would be very unlikely that someone would want to do a small roofed parklet structure when there's.
But we don't allow, you're speculating on the likelihood of what they would want to do.
Yes.
I don't know that we've heard that.
That's
but
even if
just a second.
Yeah, sure.
The proposal would not allow any of them, not what you're saying they wouldn't want to do, which I'm not sure is the case. You're saying we prohibit it entirely, whether they want to do it or not. If they wanted to do a parklet, the size and similar structure to what we already allow in the downtown area and on Ramona, we don't allow that. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Why do we not want to allow that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We've had this discussion. I mean, part of it is that when you look at the street, you can't assume that only one business is going to do it. You actually have to look at what's the case if all the businesses do it or multiple businesses do it. And then what are the consequences of that happening? And when you, even if everybody, there's 22 restaurants, and if they all wanted to do a little teeny parklets, you'd still see a proliferation along the street of these structures. Now, you still have the same problems with utility access, because now you have a structure that you have to remove in order to be able to get access to utilities. You're going to have restrictions of visibility, which because of
So
these structures.
let me,
I'm just saying that if you permit one, you have to be able to permit all. And if you
Understood.
permit all, then you have to look at the consequences of all.
so, and what I'm trying to get at is we do allow it on University and Ramona. You're not proposing to allow the same thing on Cal Ave that we do University and Ramona. All those same issues apply to University and Ramona. So why wouldn't we want to allow the same same structures with the same limitations that we do on University and Ramona?
Sure. Bruce, maybe you can help. Let me see. I don't think there's one specific issue. I think it's the confluence of all of the issues that we've just been talking about in terms of that decision of whether or not we would allow parklets on Cal Ave. To your point, we do allow, I think parklets are no bigger than maybe 300-ish square feet. And so we would expect if we were going to do something similar to that, we would keep the same restrictions, because anything beyond that, we are really, talking about a greater code and evaluation. I think the thing that what Bruce is trying to also, not just in terms of the parklets in Cal Ave, but when you think about the parklets in University, those parklets are designed and built to be in a traffic way. And so we allow for different levels of guarding and barriers than is necessary, frankly, in a pedestrian mall. And so it becomes a question not only of kind of the practicality of it, but also what do you want it to look like as you walk down California Avenue? Do you want, a parklet of 300 square feet like that with those walls and that roofing? And that's a choice.
The traffic barrier aspect, we simply would not need to apply to Cal Ave. So that's not an issue. That's a subtraction from requirements. That's not an additional requirement.
Exactly. But what I'm saying is if we were to adopt the same requirements, then you would be allowing businesses to build those similar type barriers. And it becomes a question, do you want that barrier? Would you want to allow that?
Well, and that's what I'm trying to get at is what are the reasons why
Right.
you're proposing that we would not allow those same sorts of structures that we allow on University and Ramona. And I will say that Ramona doesn't have traffic. Yeah.
Agreed. Ramona is also a lot smaller subset.
Nevertheless.
And we are working on a Ramona project similar to Cal Ave and University. So I do expect we are bringing that forward. And so this can become a discussion topic and it will become a discussion topic for the retail committee when we bring forward, what does the closed version of Ramona ongoing
Currently on
look like?
Ramona, we allow
Correct.
the structures. Are you saying that we might in the future prohibit those?
No, I'm not alluding to one way or the other. I'm saying we have the opportunity to have the same discussion about Ramona and what we would want the look and feel of it to
Yeah,
be.
but the opportunity to have that discussion, we're having this discussion now. So the question I'm trying to get at is what clarity on what are the reasons why we're saying we will prohibit on Cal Ave the structures that we currently allow on University and Ramona. That's a clear question.
And I think staff has answered it. Square footage is one thing that we're considering, the aesthetic, the look and
No,
feel
the
of
same-
walking.
It's not square. If square footage, my question was, why wouldn't we allow under the same rules, which limits the square footage? So square footage is not an issue if we apply the same rules.
Correct. If you apply the exact same rules, I think then if you manage the risks associated with that, the other aspect becomes, as Bruce was talking about, what do you want it to look like when you walk down California Avenue? And how do we want to engender that kind of pedestrian mall and the flexibility of the space and the use of that space?
So if it boils down to not these other physical issues, but aesthetics, then that becomes the basis for the decision.
Yeah, I mean,
It's just aesthetics then, because the other issues are not different from university or remote.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's several considerations, on this. I mean, I think aesthetics are a really important consideration. I think that when you walk down the street and you look at a parklet, we don't walk down the roadway, we walk on the sidewalk. And so we don't really see how much the parklet, if you're walking down the street, actually blocks your view of the adjacent business. Even if you remove the railings or the barrier, but you still have the column, the structure, and the roof, all right, you're still going to block how people are going to be able to see the storefronts of those businesses. So I think that that's a functional thing. I think that in terms of the aesthetics, we're looking at it to be an open environment as opposed to a closed environment. And so I think that's important. I also think that you have to look at, and I'm not to repeat myself, but you have to look at the worst case situation, which is, let's say everyone wants to do just the smallest parklet. Well, they're going to do the largest parklet that's permitted now. So let's say it's 350 or 400 square feet. And you look at all those things when you walk down. California Avenue has, especially on the south side, has a very high restaurant density per tenant building. And it's much higher than what you have like on Emerson or University. And so you're going to see a lot more structure on the street than you would in these other contexts. So I think you have to look at that context too and say, well, is it appropriate there given the restaurant density, which can only get larger, in my point of view. So all those things contribute to what I'd say is creating a lot of clutter on that street. And at the same time, and those are aesthetic things. I absolutely think that that's an aesthetic thing. But in talking with our fire folks and Tammy and stuff, we talked about these scenarios. It gets a little complicated to do the fire life safety when you've got to navigate multiple structures that are on both sides of the street that are blocking access to be able to get to a building. And there's already some problems with Cal Avenue buildings have awnings that project up to 6 or 7 feet out above the sidewalk, and that's not permitted anymore, but was permitted previously. And so you have a combination of contextual things.
So you're saying that because there's a greater density of restaurants, it compounds the fire life safety issues.
Yes.
Okay. That's a reasonable argument. Yeah.
Can you go to slide 11? And slide 11 shows that huge umbrella. I do like the look of it, the fact that the walls are all transparent.
Yeah.
That gives a good aesthetic.
Yeah.
So something like this would be allowed on Cal Ave.
Yeah.
But how about if instead you had the same roof, but instead of being supported by a column in the middle, was supported by a perimeter structure? But you still have the same look, same aesthetic, except you'd have edge supports. Would that be permitted?
Well, I think it depends on the way the umbrella system or awning system is supported. You have, in this case, it has a central sort of support, and that can be anchored. This can be anchored in this example, sort of anchored into the platform itself. But so it really depends on that, and you can see this. There's, a lot of these cantilevered large format umbrellas have a single base, and the base is really heavily weighted in order to be able to manage the cantilever and just the size of the thing. So, I mean, you could do pairs of cantilevered on the opposite ends that can help shade the area as a whole, but we're really looking at not permitting structures to be fastened to the street. So if you're going to do 4 posts around the perimeter and then have a tent structure on that, it has to be a system that's self-supporting. Now, there's some really great awning systems where you have posts on 2 ends that would have those supports that come up, and then it cantilevers out through the center, and then it just can fold or whatever. So there's other ways to be able to do that. But staff's recommendation is not to put attachments on the street. And that's a lesson that's been learned from trying to access utilities with the current parklets.
But if you had a standalone 4 poles or 6 poles around the edge of this supporting it and had similar aesthetics and nothing was fastened, so it was still freestanding, would that be allowed?
What did you have something you wanted to add to that? Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a good example of something that would have to be reviewed when going through the encroachment permit process to understand how it works.
So that, yeah, so I mean, if you back off, big picture, you're saying you don't want things fastened to the ground. You want them freestanding, and you're worried about aesthetics. You don't want big blocky walls and
Yep.
big structures blocking the views. But if those are the constraints, that you'd have a lot more options than just an umbrella. There might be other.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Sorry.
sure. And then from that aesthetic standpoint, this example of an opaque umbrella with the flaps on the edge to help on the weatherproofing, visually is more of an obstruction than a translucent roof. And so that's one of the things that I'm struggling with is why that's more favorable aesthetically than a structure that has a translucent roof like we allow on the parklets downtown.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it gets back to the question of what is the structure supporting the translucent roof, right? So, I mean, if you look at these different examples, they have posts and beams, they have joists, and then they have their acrylic, either corrugated or flat panels that are resting on the top of the roof on some sloped basis in order to be able to provide drainage. So, you're going to see the sloped portion of the thing plus the supports that are doing it. We've talked about not wanting to have anything fastened to the ground. So that's the issue with the supports for a structure like that. I think that when you look at the aesthetics of those things, I mean, quite frankly, I think they're pretty disappointing what they look like. I mean, I would say if we walked around and looked at 10 of those things, we'd probably all say they all look,
These or which?
Where you see acrylic or plastic roofs over a parklet space.
I would say that
I'd say
I've seen some really aesthetically nice parklets in other communities and including in our own.
Yeah.
You look at Evia and others. No, they're nice. I
But I think
argue,
that,
I would argue the opposite.
yeah, but I want to mention something like the thing about, like, you look at Evia and wonderful place. And I think a lot of people really love that. But, the thing about that parklet is that it's very tall. All right. And part of why those things are the way they are is that, they're almost the height of the building, right? The thing is up 14, 15 feet. And then they have these awnings that sort of hang over the roof structure. So they take up a lot of visibility on the street. I mean, if you look at it from across the street and you look at it, it basically blocks your view of the entire storefront of that street. So those structures, I think what people like about them is how high the space is in there. So they don't feel like they're an enclosed space. But its impact on the street itself is really significant. So what we're trying to do is say, here in a car-free zone, let's not go the direction of protecting everything, but let's go the direction of having it be visible and open. And so part of the decision for doing this is accepting that that's what the approach is. The aesthetics of the street is to be open and not be cluttered with structures. That's part of this decision.
Okay. Because I only have limited time before I got to jump out for a little while, let me go to a couple other items. One, the outreach for this meeting, what was the notification to the merchants and restaurants on Cal Ave? Because
For this retail meeting?
for this one,
Yeah, I'd have to ask Ruth about this.
because
But
they didn't seem to know.
well, we announced it at the merchant meeting, and then we've announced it to all the merchants that I've spoken with individually on that. And then I know that they sent out a notice that went to, I'd have to ask Ruth. Yeah.
Okay. And then, a key aspect is, and you had stated that an intention was to get these permanent standards in advance, far enough in advance of the coming winter so that investments could be made. And so on that same theme, the question is, what we're allowing, will it really support year-round activation and dining? And so the kind of the issues of sidewalls and inclement weather is wind or rain is really an important issue. So can you briefly, because I have limited time, cover what's permitted on sidewalls?
Yeah, I mean, sidewalls, they can be glass, acrylic, they can be railings, they can be planters, they can be combination of those all integrated together as part of a planter. There's many different kinds of.
Well, that's up to the 30 inches.
Well, no, the sidewall can be up to 8 feet. It's not like it's
Okay.
30 inches. It's up to, so it can be as high as
Okay.
they probably need for doing that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that allows that. Okay, thank you.
I think, Pat, what you're thinking of is the opaque portion versus the like what needs to be visible through. So the walls can be higher, but only to a certain point can it be obstructed.
Okay, good enough.
Yeah.
And then there were I can't remember which slides are in the deck on music and what's permitted. And there was one slide saying that the music, it seemed to be referring to two different music circumstances, but I'm not sure if that's the case. One was saying it can't support a business, and then something else about it had to be on the let's see, on the within their we'll call it parklet space. So are you clear on? Can you give clarity? Let's see. Permitted activities, non-commercial activities, not associated with specific business or private benefit. Does that mean kind of third Thursday street music?
Yes.
As opposed to?
Page is that?
Well, this is
34.
yeah. And I see staff report page 30. This one I'm looking at. And you're talking 34.
Page 34.
Oh, sorry. And so I just want to understand what it is we're saying here, because the music scene has been one of the biggest successes of Cal Ave, and setting aside kind of third Thursday kind of stuff. What are we allowing?
There's no new restrictions on permitting music on Cal Avenue. So businesses can do that. Third Thursday can continue doing that. As long as they're meeting what the city's already temporary use permit requirements are for doing that. If you're assembling more than, I think, 25 people or something like that, there's a permit for that. But yeah, no, you can go
But
ahead.
if you have music associated with the restaurant.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that. Yeah.
Okay, good enough. And then you had talked about kind of equity of spaces. We have spaces where some restaurants in what would otherwise be their, we'll call it parklet space, have existing bike racks or curbs or whatever. What's the plan to address that?
Yeah. As part of the street design work and looking at the adaptive street alternative, there's the identification of those obstacles to the commercial use of the street. And then we're making a list of things that would need to be relocated in order to be able to support outdoor dining.
Okay, great. And then short term, and I may be out of order on this one, but we have those wonderful planters that went in, but we still have the bollards. What's up? I mean, the concrete barriers, I should say, rather.
Oh,
than
the plastic
yeah,
orange barriers.
yeah.
I know. There's the embedment sleeves haven't been installed yet, which are what are needed for
I
the
see.
removable bollards so that they have a place to be located. And so that work hasn't been completed. And there's signage that needs to be done also. I think when those things will be done, then they can go.
About when?
I'd have to talk with Tyler from Public Works on the exact schedule. That's supposed to happen in the next couple of weeks.
All right. I think that covers my questions. Thanks.
Can you bring up slide 3? Okay, and this shows just open seating without any walls, which we're encouraging but not requiring, right? Okay, and for example, during the farmer's market, we're going to be using the street. Outside of that, is there going to be some ebb and flow? Like on slide 4, you talk about flexibility. Would they, when the farmer's market or Third Thursday isn't operating, could they move their tables out further and then bring them back in? Or are they going to be constrained within a certain area and not move?
Well, the way Third Thursday, not through, but the way the farmers market's structured now is that they have assigned stalls along the street, and they have about 80 or so of those. So the vendors know where they're to be located, and they're not in locations where a lot of the outdoor dining stuff is happening already. So there's only a few spots where there's sort of worked out some agreement where it's okay for them to locate the stall there. Now, that said, and Tim, if you want to help me a little bit on this question, because we had this discussion. Initially, we were thinking it would be, fine to be able to do that, right? Like, no one's there, so just use the space if you want to do it. But I think that we're looking at needing to be more prescriptive about where people actually locate their dining.
For legal reasons.
Yeah. If you have a permit, it's for that area, and you're to have your outdoor dining in that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing that's problematic about this picture that's on the slide is if a restaurant's not open and its tables are out there, it kind of appears like public seating, right? It's their own tables, and they probably don't want the world coming, eating on their
Yeah.
tables and making them dirty.
Right.
And so I think restaurants are going to want to put some type of barrier around it.
Yeah.
And that's permissible to put barriers.
Completely. Yeah.
In the staff report, it said something about that you don't have any rope. What was the phrase?
Those stanchions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what was that talking about? Because in this big packet that you have, it showed different railings and things that were permitted. So what were you talking about when you said there's no rope dividers?
Yeah, that's maybe that distinction's a little too subtle. There's for the alcohol, for getting a permit where you want to serve alcohol, you have to define the boundary of the dining area in which it's served. And so the question is, what's the minimum requirement for doing that? And, some cities, they just do these stanchions with a simple wire or cord that separates that out, says, okay, that's where people are drinking, stay there. What we were saying is to not do that with sort of basically kind of ugly, large plastic things that really are distasteful. So we're trying to draw a pretty subtle line
Okay.
around.
So you're saying
around
we
what
can have
to do.
dividers, but they just can't be the cheap ropes. They have to be something.
Yeah, they
more
got to look a
substantial.
little more. Yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, and if I had a situation like it's on the screen and I'm serving alcohol, do I have to have a boundary legally?
Yes.
So
Yes.
this would not, you couldn't have served alcohol in this picture.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, I think that you could, but I mean, you'd have little stanchions. You'd have to put some, stanchions with some cable around would be the minimum thing that you could do.
Or council member, if you look in the far back right there of the photo, right, there's one that has planters
Right.
identifying that
you
with
could drink there.
with the umbrella on top.
Yeah.
Tim, did you have something to add?
Yeah, so the serving of alcohol is actually a state requirement, ABC requirement that when outdoor dining became popular during COVID, originally their rulemaking process said you have to have a hard boundary to identify where you're going to serve alcohol, because alcohol permits in general have to be for a fixed defined location. And so they relaxed that a little bit to be a kind of like, you'll know it when you see it test. And those are my words, not the ABC's words, but it has to be like kind of patently obvious when you look at this area that is the fixed area outside that people are going to eat. So it doesn't require any particular mode of separate, whether it's stanchions or a wall or anything, but it does require it to be obvious using this multi-factor test that they've brought up. So, the Bruce has tried to be flexible within that, but while also thinking about aesthetics.
Yeah, okay. And how about if an existing restaurant has invested in some type of tent that has decent aesthetics but breaks some of the rules? Are we going to be grandfathering that in, or what's the process?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. We're not recommending continuing to permit
Okay.
tents on Cal Avenue. So, that's what we're recommending is not continue to permit those things and to have them replaced with these things. Yeah.
And that's an aesthetic issue.
Yeah, it's primarily an aesthetic issue. I mean, I think that
But
it's also a
can you put
safety issue too, because it's
to 11, slide 11.
yeah, I just, quite frankly, it's also a bit of a safety issue, Keith, because every time I've gone out there, in the evening and I've seen gas heaters and other things like that being operated. And one time I was there with Tammy, your fire marshal, and there was one tent that was pretty much enclosed with a gas heater going on in there, and you easily would have killed all the people who were eating there if it wasn't taken care of. So, I mean, I think that you have well-intended businesses and they have their staff, and the staff is looking at what they need to do to serve customers. And they might not necessarily be as cautious around some of these things. And so it's very difficult to enforce. So we're really saying to not allow it, because that's partially aesthetics. And partially, I think that it makes the street look temporary. And what we're really trying to do is end the temporary aura. And I think that cleaning it up, and I think it is an action of cleaning it up to not have those tents, will just look a lot better. And it's going to address this issue about vacancies, because some of the comments we've had is that the street looks so temporary that why would a tenant want to locate there? And so what we're trying to do is improve the aesthetics and the function of the street, in addition to the zoning code things, to reduce barriers to dealing with the vacancies. And I think that all those things contribute to making a better looking environment. That's kind of what we're thinking.
And just to introduce Keith as your chair, as you're getting more into the technicals, I've just asked staff to join us. So we've got, as you already saw, we've got Brad and Matt and Dave here to help with the kind of utilities, the public works aspect, as well as Dave, especially with the fire inspections as well, given the conflict, especially of the heaters and the structures. So if Dave, did you have anything else to add from what Bruce was talking about?
Yeah, so
Press the button on the.
okay, there we go. So I'm the hazmat inspector that goes out, and I've done all the inspections on Cal Ave, and these are a problem because, like you've said, you've gone out at night, they put them under the canopies, which are flammable. It's polyester, it's some type of vinyl, which is extremely flammable. They'll burn, they'll melt, they'll injure people. So having sides and closing the whole thing also adds the problem of carbon monoxide poisoning. So we don't encourage that, or it's actually fire code that you can't have those. It's also fire code that there has to be at least 5 to 10 feet of clearance. You're going to put heaters in that thing from the roof. So I know doing inspections on Emerson, Evia has that tall structure, and it's simply because they put electric heaters in there to meet the mandate for that clearance. So there is fire code with regard to these tent and membrane structures that are problematic during the inclement weather years, just based on how you're gonna heat them, because there is fire code that restricts us. It restricts restaurants or businesses from putting heaters inside there. So,
Did we consider not allowing propane heaters?
We did consider it, but we had this issue around it's permitted throughout the city around being able to do that with parklets now. So we wanted to, again, we're looking at this as an economic development strategy, what to do to permit commercial use of the public right of way and to be as flexible around doing that, and at the same time meet our larger community objectives. So we said, yeah, okay, go ahead. We're not going to restrict that.
And I think the other piece, council member, on the propane heaters is, for example, if there wasn't an overhead structure, but perhaps someone wished to have propane heaters out when it's simply cold, this would allow for that. And if you deny the ability for them to use propane heaters, then you bring in the added complication of electric. And how are you going to wire that between the facility and whatever the electric heater would be? So, trying to provide, to Bruce's point, the maximum flexibility for the businesses to choose how they want to activate that space, but within these guidelines.
Okay, you bring up another question that I had, but I guess we're on the topic. So for electricity, it says in the staff report that on one hand, it said it has to be permanent wiring required and lighting is required outside. So that means that we're going to have conduit going under the sidewalk and up to the area. That's going to be permanent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have others talk about this, but in talking with George Hoyt, our chief building official, we talked about practically what's really needed. I mean, it's better to have a pole that's mounted that goes overhead to be able to serve than to kind of break up that sort of the aesthetics of the mosaic glass on the sidewalk, because trying to fix that would be a mess, and it would just, so I think there's just a lot of practical problems with trying to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the permanent wiring. So if you had permanent wiring coming over, you could then require electric heaters there.
Yes.
Yep, you could.
You could absolutely do that.
You could, and you would just require additional permitting to do that. So I guess it's again that flexibility, Brad.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, with the Park Up program and Cal Ave and Ramona, we've been having these discussions for a number of years. So there have been discussions with the council in past years about requiring electric heaters. That's kind of gone back and forth, and ultimately decisions were made along the way, at least in the rest of the Parkwood program, to have that flexibility of allowing the propane heaters, even if there was a preference for electric, as long as the fire and hazmat permit requirements were met.
So if I have a structure with 3 walls, can I have propane heater inside?
No, it's also an egress issue. It doesn't meet fire code. Fire code states that if you're going to have a structure with propane heaters in, it has to be open all the way around.
Oh, okay. And so if they want weather walls, then they have to have electric. Okay, that's a good trade. Then they can make the choice. Okay.
Yep, I think you're actually hitting the nail on what we perhaps are not articulating very well. Of those are the trade-offs, but this puts it in the hands of the business to make those calls.
And I'll just add, Matt Zuka, Assistant Director Utilities. All of my utilities are obviously below ground and kind of out of sight, out of mind. But when I see the structure that's on the screen right now, what I think of is if I have a grade 1 gas leak, how am I taking it down? I don't have the luxury of waiting for them to get their contractor out there or to move it out of the way. And in our experience, restaurants don't think about the quick dismantling of their parklets very well. They think about how it looks aesthetically during normal operations. And I look at it as I've got to take it down. So the one, for example, in Evia with the nice roof structures and everything, if I have to take a demo saw to that, we will. And it's going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars. If they had designed it in such a way where it was more modular and it could be moved quickly, then we would have better access. So there's a balance there. And I don't know that the restaurants are always thinking about what we're going to need to do. We do our best to keep them in business. We have had a couple right with Coupa. There was a sewer lateral that we were able to sort of keep them in business until that, and work at night and that kind of stuff, and avoid the demolition of it. But we have had to take parklets down. So there's a real, and some of these things are $30,000 to $50,000.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I thought we were going to get to public comment sooner, but since everyone else has spoken, I want to say a few things.
Okay.
Some of my questions about short-term activation have been asked and answered, and trying to understand the ebb and flow with farmers market and Third Thursday. I'm not an engineer, and I very much respect that Keith is. I'm not in a position to ask the kinds of technical questions about specs and whatnot. I come from a place of, I'm trusting staff and knows what they're doing, and I just want to take my questions in a different direction. I want to commend you for the expedited nature of this. that you're anticipating a June 9th council meeting. Goal is to move fast. And what I'm really getting conceptually, and I really like, is that we are switching from what was once a temporarily closed off street to the creation of an open and flexible pedestrian mall. And if we were starting from scratch, it would be easier. But instead, there are these existing constraints imposed by the built environment. I hear you saying you're centering the aesthetics and that you're being thoughtfully minimalist around what's required versus optional. Could you walk us through how you've balanced the desire to give the merchants design and aesthetic flexibility with the desire to have something that looks like a coherent, intentional pedestrian mall that has some overarching uniform features in terms of design?
Yeah, I'm happy to. That's a great question. You know, one of the things that's, I mean, Cal Avenue has a lot of assets, and one of the things that's really fabulous about it actually is that when the 2016 road narrowing work was done and the widening of the sidewalks, you have sidewalks that are 22 feet basically, like from basically Izzy's Bagels all the way to Joni's, you know, and then in some places it's level, like in front of Zarine's, there's no. So and so when you look at that environment, especially on the south side of the sidewalk, you know, it has a lot of life to it. I mean, each business has done what they feel is necessary to inhabit that public space so they can have their customers there. And I think that part of the charm and the uniqueness of Cal Avenue is facilitating that and to not do like what was done. And I'm not trying to denigrate Mountain View and Castro Street at all, but what they did there is they kind of sanitized it with what they did. You know, they colored the pavement, they took out the pavement markings, and then they had a uniform way that they did these sort of railings, these fences, and then they had a grant program, so all the furniture was the same. And when you walk down that street, what do you think? You feel like I'm on a roadway that's empty with some pens that have been created for people to be able to sit for dining. It doesn't feel alive. So I think that what makes Cal Avenue special is it has a lot of life to it. So what we're trying to do is being minimalist to support and cultivate good decision making by setting guidance and examples of what to do, instead of trying to create all kinds of requirements where you get an environment that gets sort of like neutralized. So that's the art around how to do this. So there's some very subtle things that we're trying to do to help facilitate that. And one is use of planters. We're requiring them. Now, if you're in a Mediterranean courtyard, what makes those things beautiful is the diversity of planters that you have in addition to the trees or other things. I think that if every business took to heart, you know, what we're saying here, like at least 2 or 3 different types of planters that are different sizes and scales, but they're done in kind of a thoughtful way, you know, and with attention to the quality of the planting, I think it could help create that kind of life. You're seeing signs of it already. We just want to kind of move it a little bit further and trust that they know what's best. That's kind of the.
I appreciate that. I mean, I think your Castro Ave is a great example. A counterexample is Los Altos, downtown Los Altos. When you drive through, there is that uniformity of planters. It has this sort of Village of Los Altos feel, but we're not a village. I'm clear on that. We're a proper city. And so our built environment has to reflect that. And what I'm hearing is there's an eclectic, like we do a lot of different things here in Palo Alto. We're not going to have this uniform look, and we want to give the merchants the flexibility to activate their space in a manner that's consistent with who they are and what they're about. And we're confident that we're putting, you know, the right knobs in place that have to be dialed so that there is a meta coherence while allowing for tremendous individuation. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're trying to really, you know, it takes a lot of initiative to create a business, and it takes a lot of innovation to make sure it's successful.
Yeah.
And we're tapping into that and saying, go for it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that reflects who we are, you know, as a place that has historically supported businesses and doing their own unique thing. I didn't see mention, I may have missed it, of a stage or performance space. Thinking now to Third Thursday and what it's done, the live open air feel, the importance of live music and for our mental health and our wellness. I'm just wondering, and yet the constraint of the public safety vehicles have to be able to come through. Has that been a part of the conversation at all, if not for the present set of decisions, but longer term?
Yeah, I mean, you should come to the workshop this evening. No, but the next retail committee meeting we're going to have is we're going to talk about that. We're going to look at the alternatives and what's happening with that. But that programmatic need is very well understood and is being anticipated in these alternatives, how to support that.
That's great. The concern in the staff report, page 12, packet page 12, about a restaurateur wanting to build a structure in the right of way. It was sort of, we shouldn't do that for a number of reasons. We might get there longer term. And I confess, when I read that, I didn't understand what this hypothetical thing was and how it's different from what we are currently planning to allow. And there may be others who are similarly confused. So could you just describe what is being asked for and why it doesn't fit into our current allowable specs?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, they're in a location where they have, diagonal parking. And so they have a lot of outdoor seating already. And they were looking at a structure that would cover that entire area. It's about 900 square feet, which is, basically like, I don't know, 8 or 9 parking spaces. If you think about the diagonal parking space, it's a pretty large area, including having it connected, this overhead awning or other structure connected to their building. And then some other seating that they would have on their own private property as part of that structure for that too. So it was kind of all those things. Now, this structure was going to have like posts and arches, and it would be all wood frame, and then it would have concrete block around the perimeter of the thing to enclose it. And then it would have like a acrylic kind of structure over the top of it. Now, I think the inspiration for those things is a bit like when you go to Stanford Shopping Center. And at Stanford, you have many restaurants, especially the ones that face the parking lots, have introduced outdoor dining as part of what they offer. But they're pretty elaborate. Like you look at and they'll have like a concrete foundation. They'll have glass railings they'll have awnings. They'll have extensions of the roof extending out beyond it, and then they'll have shade structures that can retract up and down around that. There'll be columns and posts that support all that. So they're creating an extension of their indoor dining environment outdoors, and then they're furnishing it like it's part of the inside of their restaurant. And then they're looking at how to manage the light, temperature, and sun, and all those kinds of things with screens and all these various things. So there's a lot of structure that's there. It's basically an extension of the building. And that really needs to, at Stanford, you don't have the public right-of-way issues that we've been talking about. It's commercial property, and they don't have any of those things. So, they're not building on anything that they shouldn't be. And, they're meeting building codes with these structures that they're doing outdoors. And so there's just a completely different class of thing. So, the people think that's what would be available now with permanent closure of the street, but the street's like a giant utility trough. Connector. I mean, however you want to refer to it. So corridor, is that what okay.
I understand. I mean, it's like a JDU is an extension of the home. It's attached. It's part of the existing structure, whereas what we're envisioning is an outdoor activation that is separate from the bricks and mortar. Okay. My last question is about legacy buildings. Nice term, vintage buildings that aren't up to code with wiring, ADA. My concern is some of those legacy buildings are housing some of our successful businesses. And as we move toward CalAv 3.0 or whatever we call it, what is happening to them? I'm hearing about code enforcement getting ramped up. And maybe this isn't a conversation for you, Bruce, but for other colleagues who are here, starting to go after some of those buildings. I'm worried when I see places shut that are places that are contributing to the vitality of CalAv in its current angsty moment of not what it once was, not what it will be when it really grows into itself. And I just worried a little bit that we're maybe cutting off our nose to spite our face if we're shuttering places that are kind of keeping CalAv going strong in this interim phase of its life.
Sure. And we've got George Hoyt on the line. So George, were you able to hear Councilmember Scott Haynes's question about kind of enforcement and within the CalAv area?
Yes, I was, and thank you, Councilmember, for that question. Currently, we are responding to these cases and situations based on complaints that we receive. And so we're just responding on a complaint basis. We're not intentionally targeting particular items. But we do come across projects that have applied for permits, haven't followed through with them, and have done work illegally and have created safety hazards. And we are working very closely with these property owners and these tenants to remedy these situations as quickly and as possible.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. That's the end of my questions.
Yeah, yeah. It was a slippery slope there. We took questions and the questions kind of grew. But yeah, is there anyone online that has?
Yeah, there are no requests to speak and no hands raised.
Okay, well, that was easy. Oh. Oh,
Yes.
okay. So while we ask that, talking about, I'm asked if they have a tent. How about if you have an existing area that's not quite up to code, but has some, you're close, but you're not there, right? Is there going to be some way that they can go say, hey, I want to keep what I have right now. It's close, but it's not exactly, it violates some of these things. It doesn't have planters or whatever. Will there be a way that we can waive that or grandfather that for a few years, or so that, I mean, I understand in perfect world, we'd start fresh and everything be nice and new, but if someone has put a significant amount into the business, I also don't want to make them throw something away that's pretty close.
Yeah, I think that's providing a lot of sensitivity to, what a business's capacity is for being able to do something. I mean, we haven't come up with a strategy around how to do that yet, but if that's something that you feel like is important for us to look into, we can certainly look into that.
I would think it would be. It's going to be a hard question because, right, there's going to be these shades of gray and and we really want this to look nice and we don't want it to look temporary. But we also don't want, I mean, some of the businesses have gone through a lot at CalAv and I really want to be sensitive to that. So.
At the same time, if planters are part of the aesthetic that is required when so much isn't required, it feels hard to say somebody could wait a couple years on that particular element when that may be the one thing that unifies the street.
Yeah. And so the planters are required.
Yes.
But you also showed in the package dividers. There's different options for dividers. And so you can have some dividers and some planters. You don't.
You always have to have planters, but if you want to have dividers, you can add those.
So around the perimeter of your property, it has to be planters.
Yeah, I mean, it's to be specific, it's like kind of perpendicular to the sidewalk when you're walking. So you got to have planters like that go from the building front towards the street. You have to do that. And then in the central part of the street, when you're walking, at least 25% of that has to have planters. So
Okay.
not zero. And it can be open on the side of where your business is as you face your business. And that's basically kind of the minimum I think you could really do and have it really make a difference in terms of how you're looking, how the street would look. Yeah.
And those are owned by the business.
Yes.
And maintained by the business.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if
it's within their permit area.
And if the plants die, do we force them to get new plants or how are we going to do that?
Well, it's a good question. We sort of assume that they'll want to take care of their plants. Again,
they have a vested interest in making it.
Yeah, they have a vested interest in not have it look dead and abandoned.
Okay. So do we have requests?
Yes, we do. 1 second. So our first speaker is Charlie W. And when I call your name, you can come take a seat right here, please, and provide your public comment.
Good morning, Chair Reckdahl and committee and staff. Charlie Wadans, Palo Alto Chamber of Commerce. Just a few comments. Thanks to Bruce and Kylie and Ruth for all the efforts that you've put into this. I've sat at many of your meetings, and I think the last one with the merchants was, you gave quite a detailed presentation, which I haven't heard much pushback on because I think you addressed many of the merchant options that they were looking for. But just a few comments. One that we have heard quite a bit about is the need for public restrooms on California Avenue. And for many of the events that happen there, having public restrooms is something that both businesses and the guests that are on the street talk to us about. So under your other considerations, if you can continue to consider public restrooms. The other one that is coming out more and more to me is the speed of bikes on California Avenue and how people have really feel it's become a dangerous situation, especially with the motorized bikes. And I know there was conversation at one council meeting that we would that the speed would be limited to 8 miles per hour, but there's no enforcement of that, and bikes are coming through very quickly. So there's quite a bit of concern and ask if there can be consideration on how to manage the bikes. And then just a few other comments. I don't know, and maybe for the next meeting in May, there can be a conversation. I don't think there's an understanding what the difference is between the outdoor activation and outdoor dining on California versus the parklet. And I still don't think there's a clear definition of why they can't have a parklet and what the outdoor, so if that can be addressed. As well as, are there going to be pre-approved standards so that when a business goes in to put in a permit, that they can choose from a already pre-approved standard that would help the permitting process go quickly? What is the timeline after June 9th? What can they expect to happen after June 9th if council approves this? And then the final piece is if you can begin to discuss the fees with the businesses, because I'm not certain that they fully understand the fees that are associated with that. So again, thanks for all the great effort. And those are just a couple of comments for going forward. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carol G.
Greetings. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for the report. It's been very informative. I'm Carol Garston. I'm the producer and founder of Third Thursday, California Avenue. Many things kind of came to my attention from your comments today. One thing I would love for the city to consider are entertainment zones. State of California determined on January 1st of this year that areas can be defined as entertainment zones and alcohol can be permitted during certain times and places. They're already implemented in San Francisco and other areas of our state, and this would allow programs like Third Thursday to have an open alcohol time. So I'd like the city council and staff to please investigate that. There are a lot of people who come out for Third Thursday, and they would love to be enjoying a beer or a glass of wine and walking around listening to music. I'd like to reiterate what Charlie said about public restrooms, also water stations. It's just the right thing when we have a public area that people should be able to have access to water, filling up water bottles and having water. Bicycles are an issue on Third Thursday and all the time. So I'd like to reiterate what Charlie said about bicycles, particularly during Third Thursday when bikes are not allowed. It's very hard to control that situation, and we'd like some assistance. Let's see. I wonder if there's going to be public eating areas. Lots of people get food to go on Cal Ave, and it would be nice to know that besides the parklets, there actually are areas where people can come and eat and enjoy the outdoor environment of the car-free street. And I just want to thank everybody for your support of the wonderful Third Thursday California Avenue Music Festival. The City Council has supported this event for the last 2 years. We just celebrated our 2nd anniversary. We've gone 25 months in a row, consecutively bringing the community together through the joy of live music. Thank you so much.
Our final speaker is Solik.
Thanks. Hey, everyone, and thanks to Bruce and everyone for all the amazing work they've done. I just wanted to give some perspective from, a business, co-owner of Zareen's restaurant. My name is Salik. So there's a couple concerns with the current plans that we're going towards. One of them being the current structures, that umbrella facing solution is not really long-term. That would get damaged very quickly compared to a permanent structure. And if we're talking about aesthetics, it's again, it's a opinion-based thing, but it really wouldn't be close. Having a permanent structure that would last years and years, like between Tarun and Zareen's, there are thousands of people coming to Cal Avenue. There's no one pulling nearly those numbers. It's just the reality, right? I hate to like toot our own horns here, right? But the reality is we are driving all the traffic, and we don't plan on leaving in 2 to 3 years. We plan on making like Cal Avenue the place. And we plan on investing multiple hundreds of thousands to do this. So to limit it to this kind of bandage thing where it's, oh yeah, a couple thousand an umbrella thing and everyone has it. Imagine if everyone had an umbrella, it would look like a farmer's market, right? So I don't see how we're really progressing here. In fact, I would prefer the cheap tents that we have. And a lot of the current solutions that we are using is because we've had no direction for 3 years. I know it's not like the best, but when there is no flexibility, and if we don't give flexibility to put permanent structures, this is what happens. People resort to whatever they can do. They resort to putting fires under tents, and I know we've really stopped that, and we've made dramatic, worked with the fire department. So the thing is, people will do what they have to do to succeed, and we're hoping that you guys can help us succeed, because we are the ones that are going to push the street forward. We're the ones that are going to bring people to the street. Having more people come to these restaurants will encourage more foot traffic, more businesses. When they see a beautiful structure like Evia, they're like, wow, I want to be next to Evia. That they're doing so successful, they're doing so great. So yeah, I hope you guys just consider that. Even the current solutions, they have ironically, a lot of the issues with access to utilities or fire, that those will still be there with these umbrella solutions and all. I know maybe not to the full extent. They will still be there. What else do I have? And lastly, we're on the same page. Like, we want to work with you guys too. We'll work with the fire. We'll work with utilities. We'll carve out little sections for you guys to get in. We'll do whatever it takes. But imagine like we're trying to put in hundreds of thousands of dollars here to really change the history of Cal Avenue, and we're being limited. At the end of the day, the business will drive the street, and I would hope that you guys support us with that. Thanks.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you. Julie, do you want to have? You're good. Okay. Well, I have a bunch that I can start with. We talked about the public bathroom, and I agree that a lot of these places, if they now have doubled their seating because they don't have room inside it's not practical to double their bathrooms. And so having some type of in lieu fee where they could pay to help have a public bathroom, I think that's a win-win, because that's the general public now can use that as opposed to being constrained by them. And there's other places, the third Thursday, I think would be awesome.
So I think, Councilmember, that would be something that we would want, when we talk about fees and how are we going to, as as all of you on this committee know, you're dealing with the budgetary kind of constraints, right? And what can and can't we afford? One of the things to consider is setting a fee in this area, the license fee for use of the public right of way, in a manner that perhaps could generate enough funding to support or at least help finance some of that investment that would be necessary. So I think these things are tied together. Obviously, you don't want it to make it cost prohibitive, but to your point, if we are increasing capacity and we're not making the physical infrastructure changes in the dwelling itself, then you could recover it in a different way.
Yeah, and even if we don't recover everything, for example, the in lieu fee now, from a city's point of view, is it better to charge a lower in lieu fee to get more money for this public bathroom that we want anyway? If you charge too much money, if you made a huge in lieu fee, then they maybe do it inside, and now the public wouldn't have access to that.
Sure. I guess where I'm stuck is perhaps the nomenclature of an in lieu fee. An in lieu fee is typically something that is paid in lieu of building something that's required based on a permit. And it's typically one time in nature. And so that does require appropriate legal steps to create such a fee. Not that it's impossible, but for something as small as this, I don't know that that would be the right structure.
It's kind of, if we're requiring them, if they want to add seating in the front, if we're requiring them to add a second bathroom, instead of doing that, in lieu of that, they could pay money to us for a public bathroom. And that would be a one-time fee, I would think. Tim, do you want to chime in?
So right now the city isn't, in this proposal at least, the city is not requiring businesses formally to add their own bathroom capacity due to the increase of the seating. The public bathroom idea is just a policy level discussion about how the city might use revenue from this program to build its own, public bathrooms to deal with this issue.
But wasn't there something in the staff report that talked about restaurants needing to add a second bathroom?
Yeah, and so I think that's just a policy level question. It's not strictly a legal one at this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if George is still.
He is, but I think, Councilmember, the current permit as proposed doesn't require a business to add that additional capacity from a restroom standpoint. So let's just say tomorrow we implemented this plan, someone moves through to do an application for outdoor activation and adds 1,000 square feet. Part of that permit right now, as proposed by staff, doesn't require them to add the necessary restroom capacity for that. Now, if we wanted to change that and then make that a requirement, but then create an in lieu fee for them to essentially buy out of doing that, that would be a different program than what we're recommending at this point.
Okay. And chime in if you have any thoughts on that.
George, did I get that right, by the way?
Yes, Kylie, thank you
Thanks,
for
George.
that. You did get that right. One area of clarification. If we are increasing the outside dining on private property, then the restroom capacity calculation would be considered and looked at when we do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate the necessity of public restrooms on this public street with the farmer's market and Third Thursday and it being a pedestrian mall, and as to whether it should be in lieu or a fee for using the public right of way. I just am interested in hearing more and learning more.
Okay. In the staff report, they also talk about putting it at those back alleys. And I just don't think that's a great spot for a public restroom. I think you want more visible, like at the foot of Ash Street or even Mimosa Lane, have it on Cal Ave, because I mean, when I go out with my wife, if there's a bathroom in a kind of dark area, she doesn't want to go there, right? And especially when women by themselves are very sensitive to that. And I'm afraid that if we have it back there, it's going to get less visibility, which means it won't look quite as safe and it might attract bad elements. I think having it on the main drag is the best spot.
I was thinking Mimosa myself, something central in the middle of the closed off portion of the street, basically.
Oh, I was thinking right on the foot, but in the middle. Because
Well,
what do we
when
think?
I say in the middle, I mean, if you look at El Camino and Birch, Mimosa is sort of in the middle. So regardless of where you are on the street.
But like on the sidewalk side.
I was thinking on Mimosa Lane somewhere, you've got your parking structure on one end, on the north end of it, Cal Ave on the south end of it. This beautiful mural, this lane just feels like put some public restrooms in there. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can look at these different locations and sort of discuss the merits of what those are. I mean, I understand the design desire to want to have them as close and visible as possible. I think there's a bit of a tension around how many restrooms, like how many facilities are needed in each one to actually meet the demand. I think there actually could be a lot bigger than we're thinking. And what makes urban ones work on streets, they're very small. They're like for one person. So, I mean, I think there's some, maybe there's some ways, some strategies around a few things that are very visible, but larger thing maybe is a little less visible. I don't know what the answers are, but I think we have to look at all that.
Could we use the dead end portion of Ash there? Because that's going to be blocked off permanently, right?
Yeah, I mean, when the community street designation was made in the comp plan, when council did that, that line is right at the face of the buildings along Cal Avenue, and then Ash Street beyond that is still a regular street. So, that's used for vehicle access and emergency vehicle access. So we have like a 16-foot fire lane that we've created in the center of that. So I mean, we'd have to think about where to locate it, where it would not interfere with that and the ADA parking that's been introduced. So I mean, it's something that can be explored.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, short answer though is from a public policy standpoint, I think we need public bathrooms there.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, then we talked about the structures. Oh, so on page 4 of the report, it talks about we'll be reducing the amount of outdoor seating. Is that because that center area is going to displace some of the current outdoor seating that restaurants have?
Yeah. I mean, there's currently there's how the sidewalk is occupied, and then there's how the roadway is occupied. And the way the roadway is being occupied in many cases extends beyond the frontage of the establishment. So like extends out beyond in front of other businesses. So I think part of it is kind of reducing that area. That's really the main thing. I think the other thing is that the street was marked for a temporary basis for only a 16-foot wide emergency egress that's in there, and that was on a temporary basis. So we're looking at actually that access way being 22 feet. Like, state code, fire code's like 20 feet, but we're making it just a little bit bigger because we got to have bikes and peds in there. And that's like really the absolute minimum of space. So we're looking at how to keep that narrow, but it does encroach a little bit in the space that businesses have been assuming that they've been able to use up until, this would be enacted. So, it's going to be wider. The central access way is going to be wider to be able to accommodate all the different functions.
Okay. Down the road, I think this has become Restaurant Row. I think most of the retail people like the drive-up areas, and so they may migrate down towards the Caltrain station, and this may become all back-to-back restaurants. If that's the case, will we displace the farmers market? There'll still be room for farmers market if there was restaurants all along the way?
Well, there's, we haven't done an analysis of the total capacity if all store frontage was converted to restaurants. I think that, right now there's 80 stalls out there, and in designing these alternatives, we've been keeping that as sort of the goal to not reduce that. We've been looking at maybe 90 or so in there. So yeah, if you increase the amount of dining, you would displace farmers market stalls. Yeah. And to what point does that mean the market needs to relocate? I don't know the answer to that.
It's kind of funny because we're closing off the street and we actually may make it harder for the farmers market, which is kind of counterintuitive. Okay. Okay. So you talked about the grease oil. So does that mean that if a restaurant now adds a bunch of seating out in the parklet or on the street, we're going to make them upgrade their kitchen? Or is this, what would be the ramifications of this discussion?
I think George is still on the line. If he could help us a little bit, but ultimately, when we are talking about capacity and the requirements for that, I think, George made a great distinction before of what is going to be required if there's development on the private property versus development in the public right of way or use in the public right of way. George, do you want to shed a little bit more light on kind of the permit?
I will try to, but I got a little distracted when
No, of course.
was asking his question. Do you mind repeating?
Yeah, of course.
The question for me?
So the council member is asking, basically, we we've identified that there are some legacy infrastructure like kitchens and the like for the establishments, some of the establishments on Cal Ave. And so what's the plan in terms of requiring upgrades to that versus allowing them to stay as is? And I think the question is bifurcated in, what would be necessary on private development expansion, like you said, on private property outdoor versus in the public right of way.
Yes, that is correct, Kylie. The distinction would be based on what is the improvement on the private property versus the public right of way at this point.
Okay, so if someone adds a back patio, they may have to upgrade their kitchen. But if they add a bunch of seating on the street, we don't have to do anything with the kitchen.
Yes,
And
correct.
if I could add a little bit, Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works. So we have staff that oversee the food service facility, what we call the FOG program for fats, oils, and grease, with inspectors that both go out to visit these facilities, coordinate with utilities to identify areas where we may be seeing buildup or even potential sewer overflow issues caused by fats, oils, and grease. And then working with the restaurants there. Restaurants are inspected. We check their records. We review permit applications when there are building permits for either new restaurants or expansions to look at the size of the grease removal devices that are being proposed. And so what's currently going on already is that where we've, well, not just in the downtown and Cal Ave areas, but especially there, given the greater outdoor seating, we haven't been requiring changes to that equipment, but we have been visiting those restaurants, inspecting, talking with them about the sizing and type of equipment they have and the frequency of the cleaning that they're doing, and starting to have conversations about where it could be appropriate to make changes and improvements.
And so I guess I'm really ignorant about what kind of equipment this is. This is something that
These
so
are
if grease goes down
devices. So
down the
the
drain.
basic idea is in your kitchen area where you've got sinks and floor drains and anything else where a drain might have grease or oils go into it. Those flow to a grease removal device that can either be like a very large tank in the ground called a grease interceptor, which sometimes can be as much as 2,000 gallons in size or larger. Those are usually outside. Or what can more commonly be known as grease traps, which are kind of smaller devices. And those are meant to separate the solids and grease from the water and let the cleaner water pass through while retaining the solids and grease so that those can be pumped out on a periodic basis and avoid having them go into the sewer system.
And they have to do this once a week, or how often?
It depends. And that's really an area where there is a lot of flexibility, because one of these restaurants we're talking about that's got a lot of outdoor dining might really be doing generating more fats, oils, and grease than was intended with the size of the device they have. But that may be a lever that they can use to say, well, we might have had someone come pump this thing out every 3 months or 2 months, and now it's going to be every month instead to try to keep up with it. And that's not always going to work. So that's where it really becomes an interactive thing to try to manage the system to meet the need, or if necessary, make infrastructure improvements.
Okay, and what happens? It clogs downstream, and then we have sewer backups. Is that the
Exactly
impact? Okay, that doesn't sound like
that
a
is
good
what we're
thing.
trying to
Okay.
avoid.
Okay, but I would encourage, instead of forcing them to upgrade, if we can force them to come more often, that seems like the better option, at least in the short term.
Yeah, and on this general topic, I should mention also that we've got a thing called a sewer use ordinance that includes all these requirements for restaurants and other types of businesses, and also contains stormwater pollution prevention requirements. We've been working for a couple of years on revamping that whole thing and improving it. And we're planning to bring that to the city council this year. We've got some outreach still left to do, probably with a major focus of that being the food service facilities. And we're planning to bring that to the Cal Ave and downtown business groups to share with them and have some discussion. But it will go into more detail even than the current ordinance does about these regulations for these devices and how to calculate their size and the different aspects about how often they're maintained and such.
Okay. On slide 29 of the, not of this presentation, but of your attachment A, it says for platforms, you need to be able to support 100 pounds per square foot. If I stand on 1 foot, just that's much more than 100 pounds per square foot. So are they really saying 900 pounds per square yard, or it just seems like that requirement isn't practical?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was taken from the existing parklet program.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can go and look and see if there was a typo or something around the number.
Okay, just revisit that because I think we have to be able to support more than 100 pounds per square foot.
I think it's referring to the total area
So,
of the
okay.
square footage. So if you've got 10 foot by 10 foot, it's 1,000 feet, and therefore.
Okay, but not, okay, that would make more sense. So let's talk about the fees. The fees were like $4,000 up front. That I mean, that seems like a lot of money. I guess if you're making a restaurant, it isn't, but I'm afraid of the straws in the back of the camel here. I mean, we're asking them to do a lot to build new structures, buy new tables, do all this other stuff. And it seems like then we're saying, oh yeah, you have to pay this fee also. And can we waive that for this initial year while we're ramping up, and then down the road, new restaurants would come in and would have to pay it? But right now, I feel like we're just kind of adding on to the misery that they're all going through.
Sure, I can handle that. And the fees that are in the staff report and that we're talking about are the fees that are in place actually for parklets. So it's important to realize that these are being paid by businesses on University, on the side streets of downtown, as well as even on the side streets of Cal Ave. It is a policy call on the council's behalf if you wish to not charge or waive the fees. But ultimately, the application and renewal fees are intended to recover the cost of staff time to review the encroachment permits, the designs, and any changes to them on an annual basis.
Okay. Well, I guess that's a bigger discussion, but I mean, $4,000 is kind of in the noise, but these merchants have gone through, this has been a very hard process for this community, and it's been even worse for the merchants. And I would think that this is one thing I would consider, just waiving the fees. But that costs money, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so again, chime in if you have any thoughts on this. Okay, it talked about a deposit fee, but I didn't see how much was that. Is that significant?
So again, policy call. What we've done in the parklet program is I believe it's about a 2,500 deposit. And the intention behind that is if there, is any debris removal that needs to happen once a tenant vacates, and the city needs to, clean anything up as a result of that. It is a programmatic choice given the more temporary, I shouldn't say that. Given the more flexible nature of the investments we're talking about for this activation, I don't know that a deposit is as necessary for your consideration. Just it's a little bit different, obviously.
Okay. Signage, you talk about the sandwich boards. I support putting sandwich boards out there as long as they look, I'm worried about looking cluttered. But I think a better thing is that, especially if you have these roofs that have tents and stuff, you may not be able to see. We've seen this in other areas for parklets, and having permanent signage on the outside of the parklet, I think would I think it's a good thing because if people are walking down the center, it may really hard to see the business signs, and having identification there would be very good. I think that's allowed. Is there any constraint
Yeah,
about
no,
signage?
we're allowing, the proposal is to permit signage that can be on, a railing or something that you have that's facing the access way. But we limited it based on kind of the city's already the sign code in terms of how much it limits it to like one sign, and that would be either a sandwich board sign or a sign that would be mounted on any of the three sides of the outdoor activation area.
Could have one on each side. If I'm coming from the east or I'm coming from the west, I want to be able to see the sign. I would think you'd.
Yeah. Well, we were following the standards that had already been set for signage and just applying that. We didn't expand on that.
Yeah, I would want to give them some flexibility because this is kind of a new animal. And before we have a signage above the business here, if you have signage as you're walking down the center, that's a new requirement. And I think we want to encourage signage as long as it's tasteful. And
yes, yeah, well, we're definitely supporting that and permitting that to be either sandwich board or a sign that can be attached on how their outdoor activation area is. But we were putting a limit on the number. So, I mean,
could we make that number 2?
2.
I mean, but now let's think about that at scale, though. This is about 2 blocks. We have about about 20 activations. If every activation put out 2 sandwich boards, you're talking about 40 sandwich boards, A-frames.
That's why I think having the fixed signs would be a better option.
So, but that's what I think Bruce is trying to say is allowing for a sign. Are you saying you would want 2 fixed signs, not sandwich boards?
Personally, I think sandwich boards look a little cluttered. I'd rather have permanent signage. But that said, I think we want them to be able to put signage up and.
So Bruce, what's the current recommendation in terms of signage allotted?
It's one sign, one or the other. Right. Yeah.
So perhaps, Councilmember, what you're suggesting is an amendment to the guidelines of they could have a sandwich board and a sign on one sign on the side of their activation space or something like that. Or no sandwich boards.
I would say 1 sandwich board or 2 fixed signs. Or up to 2 fixed signs if they want.
I kind of feel like sandwich board versus sign is really a reflection of the vibe of the place and who they're trying to attract. So I'd rather leave it up to them. And I think it's kind of too soon to know what number we can accommodate. Just don't yet have enough of a visual on what the street is actually going to look like with all of this. So I'm not ready to weigh in on the number that should be allowed yet.
Okay, yeah. I'm a little worried about clutter, but this is one thing I'd want to do outreach and see what the restauranters, because they don't want it cluttered either. Right? They have best interest make this looks nice. So
when we have our next merchant meeting, we can certainly discuss this topic.
Yeah. My personal opinion is having fixed signs on the structures would be a much cleaner design. Okay. Okay. Are we going to have any public seating nearby? Like on Ramona, we have some chairs that are just set up. Are we going to have areas that is just not associated with any business, but it's just going to be provided by the city and sitting there?
Yeah, I mean, there is some already now, which I think is you seeing how people are choosing to inhabit that, which I think some of it's been great. That's part of the street design alternatives is really looking at that, because that's a really important part of the public life on that street is having enough seating, and there's really not enough seating out there. So we want to explore that and different types of seating. It can be flexible seating, or they could be benches, but they could be benches with backs or not backs. They could be informal shapes. They can be in clusters, all different kinds of ways of being able to arrange the seating. They could be picnic tables, so you can have groups. So we're kind of looking at a kind of list of those types of things. Yeah.
Okay.
At present, Councilmember, I believe there are tables and chairs out in
There's tables and chairs out there now. Yeah.
Right.
And there's different types. There's sort
Correct.
of cafe tables, and then there's large tables. So there's seats that are kind of like this level, and then there's stools. There's sort of
Mhm.
metal colored furniture that's out there already, primarily.
That's owned by the city.
That's owned by the city. Yeah, that's out there. You see it in front of 414 California, like the former Bank of the West. And then you can see it like across from Zorene's, there's outdoor seating that's already there. That's being
Okay.
used. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess we're talking about bathrooms and public seating here. I'm also worried about loitering, and sometimes loitering is really good. If they're customers hanging outside your door, you love them. If they're homeless people that are or just people up to no good, it can become a public nuisance. And so, do we have strategies for how to balance that, or we're just crossing our fingers?
No, I mean, it's not a shopping mall. It's a public street. It's a main street. It's a commercial street. And so part of urban life is it's inhabited by the people in the general public. So you're going to have people who will want to be there, who might not, be appealing to some people who are there. But I think that part of urban life is tolerance for that stuff. So, I mean, I think it's going to be, addressing that's, a complex social issue. I think what we're trying to do here is just create the right mix of community life so that it's a really vibrant, attractive place where people want to spend time and they feel safe and feel locally identified with it. So, yeah.
Okay.
I appreciate that response. I thought that was very well put, helping us frame the context in which we're existing and what this road is. A complex set of interests to try to balance, and a high tolerance for the fact that we don't have a lot of control.
Okay. Carol had mentioned the entertainment zone. Have we looked into legally changing and making Cal-Ave an entertainment zone?
So I don't think the city council or this body has ever brought that up, that conversation. It certainly could. As the speaker said, it's become available to cities as of January 1st. To effectuate it, the city would have to adopt an ordinance and identify the details of basically like where, when, and how. So it could do that, and it's fairly straightforward. But staff could, to do that, you'd want to agendize that at a future meeting for that, so staff could prepare those questions and make recommendations to you in advance.
Good.
I really appreciate that this was raised. I think, the historic nature of Cal-Ave, as many know, it was the town of Mayfield. It was a place where you could drink alcohol back in the day when Leland Stanford Sr. and his wife Jane didn't want their Stanford students drinking alcohol. And so the lore is that Stanford students would sort of jump the fence and come into Mayfield and drink on Cal-Ave. We're talking about the 1890s and the 1900s and whatnot. But there is a sort of aspect of what has historically taken place on Cal-Ave that made it, not the dominant main street, but sort of this alternative place to be. And so I love that it, having this sort of entertainment zone designation would really recall its past and signal that even, in the present moment, this is a place where people, as Carol Garston put it, can walk down the street with a beer or a glass of wine and enjoy live music. Frankly, we need more opportunities to gather like that. And so I would love to really, kind of push this item to the forefront. If there's support from colleagues, let's attach it to what's coming.
So thank you for that feedback, council member. The council did approve a resolution. Yes, a resolution for specifically third Thursdays that authorizes the consumption of alcoholic beverages, between 4 p.m. and 10 p.m. But on this portion of Cal-Ave. I know. So it did lapse, meaning the resolution had a term date on it. So it expired in December of 2024. And so I wonder if haven't spoken with the public commenter about this, but for your consideration, it may be that if that's of interest, we could just resurrect that and renew that versus going after a full-blown entertainment zone. There are slight differences. I'm not educated enough on the differences to speak about those in an articulate manner today. But that is something that we did previously have, that we could just more readily reinstate.
Let's look at what the differences are if we could. Maybe if we needed to be an entertainment zone, maybe we already have a lot of the boilerplate that would go in that ordinance from the resolution that has lapsed.
Sure. And I think if we were not to go down the path of moving through the resolution that lapsed versus going through an entertainment zone, the entertainment zone, I do think will take more time than we're able to. I wouldn't want to hold up the outdoor activation and this and that. There are other regulations that we would need to do, like insurance. Frankly, we are, in a risk pool with other agencies. And so that's one of the kind of flags for me of like, we just need to coordinate the differences on some of those administrative things, as liabilities are ours.
Yep, understood. And also how much work that we have to do with ABC, because I think in some cases, each merchant has to apply to ABC every time that this window appears. And it'd be nice to have, if we could do one piece of paperwork every time as opposed to 17 merchants doing 17 papers, I think that there's some public benefit there.
Sure.
Okay. Can you bring up slide 10? Yeah, so we have a whole bunch of existing public amenities or whatever, bike racks or sometimes public art. And we're not taking any of these out. We're just leaving all of them as is.
Well, we're looking at Cal Avenue as like a package of elements. We did signage or doing outdoor activation, then we're looking at street design. And I think the part of the street design is to identify areas that are in conflict with some of these outdoor activation areas and identify what kinds of improvements might be needed in order to support commercial use of the street. Some places have no problems with that, and others have quite a few obstacles to being able to do that. And so that's something we're doing as part of that effort, just identifying what they are. I think,
Yeah, I think the first step is to identify it. I mean, I don't think we should go through and wipe this clean, but also there's some that don't make sense with a closed street and some that do. So I would want to investigate that and particularly talk to the business owners and say, hey, that thing in front of your business, do you still want it there? And I suspect someone would say, no, I'd rather have an open area that people can walk by and get closer to my business.
Yeah. I mean, there's traffic signage, which is no longer needed. And then there's sort of newspaper racks that people are questioning as to what the utility of that is, and then there's bicycle racks, and then there's public art, and then there's different kinds of landscape features that are either low concrete walls or urns or planter areas and things like that. So there's sort of different types of obstacles to occupancy. So we're looking at all those things. We're trying to identify that.
Okay.
Some will be easier to do on a short-term immediate basis and others might be a little harder to do.
Because the next time, what's the time frame on this? Do we think that as over the next year, we're going to get rid of some of them or?
Well, I think that would be ideal, but we haven't really worked out the program for how to do that. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Make sure they hit on my spot. Oh, one thing that was mentioned in public comment is the speed of the bicycles, right? And we'd talked in council, I think, about having the center be curved somewhat to keep the speed down and to kind of make it more pleasant. The pictures that we saw here are just straight. And so what's the plan? Do we have a design or is this just kind of a preliminary design?
Well, we're, looking forward to talking about this when we come back next month. And so there's two alternatives, and one looks at the bike lanes down the center of the street, and the other one looks at curving them along the length of the street, so varying them. So there's two different options for how to deal with that. one of the benefits of having down the center of the street is it provides a lot of equity around businesses on either side of the street having the amount of space they want to use for outdoor activation. So, I mean, I think it's a bit of a challenge around how to be fair around the distribution of that and then how to look at reallocating it based on where the bike lanes are.
Are there things that we can do, speed bumps or whatever that would be still attractive? Because you try to make this an attractive area and not look like a.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that in terms of, again, we'll talk about this next time, but sort of strategies for slowing bikes down. I mean, there's, we're looking at, obviously there's signage. Another one is to not stripe the street like it's a cycle track with green to blast. I mean, that would be a mistake. So, and then another thing that's been very effective are, like they're kind of like speed bumps, but scaled more for bikes because when they're for cars, you can kind of just go right over them.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at how you do pedestrian crossings and the markings for all those things, and to raise the surface of the road up for those kinds of crossings. So that would help kind of create some texture that would help reduce the speed. Looking at texture, there's some textural things that can be done to help. Yeah, it's like, I mean, I'm in Berkeley riding my bike there all the time. There's places where the texture makes it harder to ride your bike, even though it's not anticipated. And I guess it makes you slow way down and pedestrians don't even notice it.
Yeah, that would be really good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's some things like that. And some other things that have been effective is signage actually on the pavement that identifies that it's a slow zone for bicyclists. So they kind of know that's what they're entering into. So, I mean, I think those are some strategies that we're looking at.
People ignore signs though.
Some of us have been in this room a lot this week, and last night was rail in here. And during rail, we got the bike ped grade SEP presentation, and within the larger context of what's planned for bikeways in Palo Alto. So can you just remind me, would the bike ped people say that Cal Ave is an important artery for them for bikes? Or are they not trying to use Cal Ave for bikes getting from one end to the other?
No, my understanding is that people who use Cal Ave as a bike route would like Cal Ave to be a bike route. Yeah. And yeah.
So that's the tension I'm highlighting. So we're trying to slow it down and make it bumpy and harder to use, but there may be an entirely legitimate city effort directed at including Cal Ave in, the more bikeable Palo Alto concept. So I think it's very tricky. Agree that, we've got to figure out how to enforce these, the effectively motor bikes that are going super fast. I don't know, if just a couple well-placed police officers for a couple of months. I know my kid got a bike ticket biking to Fletcher as a 7th grader because she ran a stop sign, and man, that changed her behavior. And she was embarrassed and had to go to traffic school or whatever, kid traffic school, bike traffic school. Oh, I don't know, whatever it was traumatic, but the police were not there every day, right? They were there a couple of times, and it really sent a message. This is not the place to do this anymore. And it may be that's a strategy that ends up being more cost effective.
I mean, making Cambridge be the bike place, I think, is the right answer, and making it really bumpy on Cal Ave so people can go down Cal Ave, but they're not going to go unless they really have to.
But let's just make sure we're talking to our bike ped colleagues, because we don't want this effort to undermine that. We want to all be on the same page.
Correct. I mean, with the Caltrain station at the end, obviously, I think Councilmember Lithcott-Hames, you are hitting the nail on the head. There is a tension here.
Yeah. Cambridge isn't that far. It's a nice little broom. And, who knows what's going to come of the Molly Stone proposal.
Mm-hmm.
There's change afoot. And if there's a safer way for bikes to be that allows Cal Ave to be, not safer. If there's a, just as expedient path for bikes who might prefer, frankly, not having to deal with pedestrians walking back and forth across their bikeway, that may be something worth looking at.
Okay. Yeah. And so my last thing, 11 o'clock, the structure issue is that I think we have to kind of noodle on that and really understand what are we trying to solve? Is it purely aesthetic issue? Is it the the utilities having to disassemble this? And if so, do we have a disassembly? This thing has to be able to be removed in 15 minutes or, but I think having a tasteful structure would be consistent with what we're trying to do. So I think we,
So let me just put practicality here, and then I think at a high level. The timeline that staff have this moving and the action today for the committee is to review these guidelines. And if it's in line with what you're thinking, then make a recommendation to council so that they can be considered in June on the 9th, and then frankly implemented in the next few months. To the extent we want to think about changing these guidelines and implementing something more similar to the Parklet program with physical structures, we will not be able to make that timeline. So that does mean we will move through likely another winter months without guidelines in place, aside from what we already have. So I just caution that because unless we were to just take the existing Parklet program and say, take that, limit everyone to the 300 square feet that the current Parklet program has, which is, you've heard, that's a significant reduction from what some of the frankly, that's a 50% reduction from what the average outdoor activation space is. Then that does have a lot more work that needs to be done. And what staff's trying to do in this is, as Bruce has kind of alluded to between talking about today and next month, is really the flexible use of the outdoor space, setting up a encroachment permit process with these guidelines to empower businesses and assist in dealing with the colder months as they approach. And then the next phase is looking at how do we make more investment in this street in a more permanent way. Obviously, that will require funding, but still. And how do we, beyond just the activation guidelines, look at everything from a meandering bike lane to more permanency, shall I say, kind of like we've been talking about for University Avenue. I'm not saying it's at the scale of University Avenue, but just that's kind of the phasing that we're talking about here. And ultimately, it's the committee's and the council's policy call. But I just want to bring the reality of, if we want to explore permanent structures, I think that's going to take a lot more implementation and staff work.
okay, but I mean, I think what you have here is very good. And I think we should move it on, but I'm just saying that I think down the road we can tweak them. And for example, if I look at packet page 38, which is the slide 25. Do you have the packet? Okay. And so it has these design elements. I'm looking at this is staff report page 34, which is packet page 38. And it has these design elements. I think they're fine. The overhead shelter shows the pole. I mean, I would think that there are other things that would meet our aesthetics and meet our freestanding constraints that aren't constrained to that pole.
Bruce, can you elaborate a little bit? I think this slide is, and this piece of the element is identifying options, but by no means does it preclude from alternative.
I mean, I think that's right. It's kind of saying, like, what does the thing look like? So someone kind of like a visual way of looking at what it is, but it's not saying this is what it's supposed to be. So that's what that is. I think, as we've talked about, there are some other ways to think about. This does not specify what sort type of support is needed for your overhead shelter. So it's not saying it has to be a single pole in the center, So, I mean, it gets to your point of they can propose other ways of doing it. It's not proposing one way to do it, and it's not limiting how to do it, but it's saying that it needs to not be a tent, and it needs not to be a permanent structure is the way we've been discussing it. So it's kind of left it pretty open. And looking at different fabricators, there's several different ways of being able to do those things. So we didn't want to show all the options, but we needed to show something.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how is this going to work? That each restaurant's going to come to you and say, this is our design, and then you bless it? Or how do we?
Well, it's the way the encroachment permit process works now for parklets. I mean, the application, they have to The submittal requirements have been adjusted slightly, but they'll have to do some drawings that shows what it is, specify what all the elements are. If there's any structural stuff, they need to provide that information. And then they have to fill out the rest of the application form and they submit that. And then Public Works staff reviews that application as part of the encroachment permit process. And they'll evaluate it based on is it or is it not meeting the requirements that are in here? And is it meeting the intent of what the guidance is? And there might be some back and forth around the sort of subjective parts about the guidance. But, and then a permit would be issued once that's approved. So that would be the process.
But I would think that what we really want is we don't want walls blocking the view. We want it to feel open, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And we want it to look polished.
Yeah.
And so if some restaurateur comes to you and says, here's my design. It has enough windows so it doesn't
Right.
feel boxy and it looks polished, I would think that we would want to say yes for that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if we communicate that with the restaurants, I think that would be a good thing, is that this is what we're looking for, but it's not the only solution. And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
okay. Because I think that we want to work with the restaurateurs to come to us. I think we both have the same goal. It's not like we have
Absolutely.
opposing views. And so I think we can, okay.
We're trying to be minimal about what we're requiring, but being clear what those requirements are and the guidance we have for it so we get the desired result.
And I think the guidance of it, we don't want a bunch of walls blocking the view. We want to feel open and we want this to look polished. We don't want this to look like a temporary situation. I think those are two very important topics. And okay. So then, Julie, do you have any other questions? Okay, so I'll make a motion to recommend the guidelines to the council.
Second.
Okay.
And so before you do that, just one clarification. Did you want to make any recommendation on the fee levels? Like, you had talked about wanting to perhaps subsidize. And then the other thing that we've talked about is whether or not we would want to set the license fee at a level to help offset the cost of a restroom or public restroom, shall I say, versus, I'm not saying that would fully cover the cost of that, but are you thinking about a license fee at the same level as what's in downtown, which is $10?
Yeah. I would think we'd want to be consistent with downtown from the fee, the ongoing rent effectively, right?
As to use the same square footage as the downtown?
I think that would be the fair thing to do. And my personal opinion is that we should keep the fees as low as possible. The application fees. Now that comes back down to finance, right? Maybe
Sure.
Maybe this is a question for finance committee, as what you said it for. Again, the restaurants have been kind of whipsawed back and forth, and so I would.
Sure, they have. And I mean, we are expanding their square footage, their ability to serve a greater number of patrons at a very affordable price. So as much as I appreciate and understand and advocate that a lot has been done and there's been a lot of uncertainty, and restaurants are interested in investing in this outdoor space because it is beneficial to them as well, and their bottom line. So finding that balance, I think, is important.
Okay. So in the staff report, I think there was a table of fees.
Correct.
Was there a recommendation for specific fees?
I think what staff, and we can bring this back, this is going to go on action with the full council. I think understanding a sense from this committee on the fees, I mean, staff would recommend we adopt, at least on an application standpoint, keep the fee standard in terms of the existing program. In terms of what the square footage would be, I think there's a difference between the square footage of a parklet versus the square footage of these outdoor activation spaces. A parklet, again, is limited to about 300 or so square feet, where some of these can be upwards of 1,000. And we're really hitting, as we've talked about, those infrastructure issues, everything from fog to bathrooms. And we aren't, for the public space, making or requiring infrastructure changes on the private property. And so I do think it becomes a question for the council on how much you would want to subsidize that license or that per square foot fee versus raise funds to help offset some of that perhaps more centralized infrastructure. I don't think you have to come up with a number today, but even if you were to provide hey, I want to keep the fees as low as possible, or I would like staff to come back with a recommendation of a fee that would help offset the cost of an investment in, public restrooms, is the guidance that we would need to bring something back with a more full
You're
analysis.
saying that the application fee is what we charge the people downtown right now.
Correct. What I put in this is the FY 2026 fee,
Okay.
not the 2025 fee. So it's not today's rate, but it's what the rate will be in July.
Okay. As much as I'm sympathetic, I also think uniformity is a good thing. And so I think we should just have the same application fee and same square foot fee. What do you think, Julie?
Well, I'm a little nervous. There's two of us here and we're at the end of a meeting that should have ended, or at least according to my calendar. Like I hate it when we're making really important decisions slammed up against the wall of time availability, everybody needing to be somewhere else. So I'd rather put the meaty question to council. I agree with Keith that uniformity matters. So whatever offsets, the second thing you said, I think it was, not the first thing.
Yeah. So what we can do then is bring forward, I think the uniformity is what's running through. So if we take the motion that you just made, maybe perhaps with the added of a preference for uniformity in fee structure, then that's enough guidance for staff to come back with both what does that look like, what would that potentially generate based on the existing permits that we've got in place, and then that can help inform the more robust council discussion on perhaps any adjustments you may wish to make at the square foot level.
Yeah.
I would like to add the entertainment zone / alcohol resolution to this motion if we could, since it wasn't part of the original materials.
I concur, yeah.
Sure. So clerk, what I think the motion is shaping up to be is recommend the guidelines to city council with a preference for maintaining uniformity in fee structures, in the fee structure, I should say. And recommend council refer to staff review or pursuit of an entertainment
Review
zone?
of expired resolution on alcohol, or
Well, I
review
think
of,
you are, the preference was the entertainment zone, not the.
well, no, we don't know which is better, right?
Fair
We
enough.
need to know the difference.
To review differences between the expired open container resolution and an entertainment zone.
And then is bathrooms included? I don't think the fee structure is really shining light on the interest we have in public restrooms. Is that already built into the guidelines?
That's not built into the guidelines. I think that doesn't need to be part of your motion. I think we can put that as part of just the dialogue that you had.
Can we say recommend recommend consideration of public restrooms in California Avenue?
Sure.
I mean, I would almost say with a preference for maintaining, maintaining uniformity of fee structure while considering how to fund public restrooms. Could we
That's
add
awesome.
that?
That's
With that.
perfect. Yep. That's perfect.
Just wondering if since our third member isn't here, if there's anything that seemed extremely important to Pat that we haven't got in here.
Well, I think what Pat was most concerned about is this whole structure thing.
Yeah.
And if he knows that we have flexibility in that we really want something that looks polished and we want something that doesn't look blocky with walls, we want transparency. I think that goes towards what he was looking for.
You're saying you want some structure like that?
Yeah, if a structure was transparent and also looked polished, then I think he'd be happy with that.
And
His point, I think, was that instead of having a tent up top, if you had some type of clear glass as a roof, that might look even better than an umbrella up top. So having some flexibility where we aren't forcing people to have an umbrella, I think would make him happy.
Yeah.
Okay. Should we take a vote?
Yep.
Chair Rectal,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott Hames.
Yes.
Motion carries 2 yeses and 1 absent.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your work.
Yeah, thank you. I think you did a very good job.
Seriously.
And
Yeah.
And the package A, I thought was phenomenal. I thought it was very complete. I think it had a lot of, discussed a lot of things.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback.
The last thing before we adjourn tonight, 6 o'clock, Lucy Stern.
Yes.
Coming.
And your next meeting will be on June 18th.
Okay. We are adjourned. Thank you.